Everybody's ready to go.
Well, let's get started then. Hello, everybody out there. I'm not Christopher. I can see how it's working fine. Anyway, unfortunately, Christopher could not be here tonight and has asked me to substitute for him. So that I will do, and we'll use some of Christopher's charts that he's already prepared, and we'll follow along with pretty much the same, following the same format that Christopher has done in the past. And I think it's kind of interesting. Actually, I didn't realize that Christopher was actually, that there's a lot of mythology and astronomy related stuff in here, which is all fascinating. And we'll probably concentrate a little more on the astrology today, but let's just get started. Okay, so last time, hi Laura, come on in. See, Christopher's got a little quote here. If I can remember how to do this. From Ralph Waldo Emerson. Men should take their knowledge from the sun, the moon, and the stars. Now, I don't know the context in which Mr. Emerson said that. So I don't know whether he was talking about astrology or not. But tonight we're doing Cancer. So we're going to do the 3 decanates of Cancer. And I'm going to give you a pop quiz first. Not
First?
First.
Don't.
No? Okay. Well, first tell me who knows what the 3 decanates are in Cancer? What signs they are.
Oh.
No, not constellations, the signs. What's the pattern?
Oh, Cancer, Scorpio, Cancer, Pisces.
Right. Just want to make sure you guys have been learning something in the class. Very good. Okay. So those are the 3 decanates that we're going to do. And I don't know if Christopher talked much about the history of these decanates, but they go a long way back. They go back to about the 1st century, 2nd century AD. They actually go back further than that. They go back several hundred years BC, but it was Ptolemy who was a great astronomer and astrologer, and who put everything together, canonized these 36 decanates, ultra-zodiacal decanates, back in the 2nd century AD. So, and each one of these decanates has been associated with a 10-degree section in the sky. And if you're ever interested, one of the more interesting things is if you ever look at a star map, it may be confusing as to where the constellations are relative to the 10-degree section of the sign. Okay? But just so you'll know, if you're ever out there looking at the stars and wondering, or looking at a star chart and wondering about the pattern, each of those 36 decanates follow along by longitude. So the first of the decanate, of the constellation, the first of the constellation, and often there's the brightest star that marks the beginning of the constellation. The longitude of that along the ecliptic, they all follow in order. So they all go all the way around in the proper order, even though they're all mixed up north and south. Right? Because you'll find some of them are north of the celestial equator, some of them are south, and or south of the ecliptic. But they do follow that longitudinal pattern. So anyway, so we're doing Cancer tonight, and we're doing the 3 decanates of Cancer. So if we move it along here, I'm moving faster in my charts than Ralph Waldo Emerson. Let's get all this stuff up here at one time. Okay. Well, you all know about Cancer. It's the cardinal water sign, or movable water sign. Key word is I feel. And the three decanates are, the first decanate, Cancer, Cancer, is pictured in the sky by Canis Minor, a little dog. Second decanate, Cancer, Scorpio, is pictured in the sky by Hydra, a great big long water snake. And the third decanate by Argo, from the famous Argonauts, the ship Argo, that sailed around and got in all kinds of trouble. So, okay, so
That was Ulysses, right?
well, there was Jason was with the Argonauts. Ulysses, I don't think was ever involved, but we may find out here. Let's see if there's anything here we want to talk about. Okay, so we're looking at the first decanate here. There's a picture of it up there. The dates are June 22nd to July 2nd, approximately the first 10 days in the sign. The description is a little yapping, treacherous cur. Now, wouldn't you love to have your sun, moon, or ascendant in this decanate? I had a good friend when I was teaching astrology in Norman, Oklahoma, and she was really something. And I remember the day she came up and said, "Paul, I just read about the decanate my son is in. I'm a yapping cur, treacherous, blah, 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 blah." And I said, well, okay, first of all, the signs, whenever we have the lessons that are taught, the spiritual lessons that are taught, both that you read about in Spiritual Astrology book or that you read about in Course 10 when it's going through the decanates, is the ancients picked out a trait that they thought was the most important. And sometimes that trait was a bad trait, which didn't mean that that decanate is not as good as another decanate. They're all just different. So that's something to remember. Now the spiritual text here, the wages of sin, is death. But the key, that actually comes from spiritual astrology, and we won't talk much about that tonight. But the key word for the decanate is moves. That's the key thing. Okay, and I'm... So, Canis Minor is a small constellation. The most prominent star is Procyon, which is a pretty bright star, but it still got its name from Sirius, the dog star that you studied last week, which is Canis Major, Sirius, the dog star. So, Procyon actually means before the dog. Because it rises either just before the dog star. Okay, and we're going to skip some of this, and we're going to get now. Christopher has some very interesting stuff about Greek mythology here. Which he's gone to great pains to put together, and I think it talks about it in your handout, doesn't it?
Yeah, the mythographer Hyginus claims that Canis Minor represents Mara, the dog of Icarus. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Long paragraph there.
Right. And right. Claims that Canis Minor represents Maera, the dog of Icarus, who learned the secrets of making wine from Bacchus. So, does that mean the dog learned the secrets of making wine? When Icarius, not Icarus, Icarius, which is different than Icarus. Icarus is the guy that flew too close to the sun and crashed, right? So when Icarius shared his wine with, I guess it's Icarius, with some unsuspecting shepherds, they rapidly became intoxicated. Believing they had been poisoned, they fell upon Icarius and killed him. Well, his faithful dog Maera ran and alerted Erigone, Icarius' daughter and led her to where Icarius was buried. Well, she grieved. She hung herself. Zeus, which got Zeus very upset, and he put him in the sky as various constellations, which is a common theme in both Greek and Roman mythology. Is somebody does something good, and they get to be either a constellation or a star in the sky. So that's how they got there.
Origine became Virgo.
Yeah, Origine became Virgo. And I like the one about the story of Artemis, who had a virginal reputation to uphold. See, how does that start on? Another major story of Greek mythology is that Actaeon, the son of the priestly herdsman Aristaeus. One day, Actaeon was making his way through the woods with his favorite hunting dogs, and he happened upon Artemis Diana bathing in a stream. He knew that he shouldn't be staring, but she was so beautiful he couldn't take his eyes off her. Artemis, who had a virginal reputation to uphold, was infuriated, and the thought of being ogled by a mere mortal sent her into a rage, and she transformed Actaeon into a stag. Actaeon ran off with his dogs chasing him, who, mistaking him for a stag, tore him limb from limb. So so there's always lots of interesting stories. But let's read about what C.C. Zane says about Canis Minor. The first decade of Cancer is depicted in the sky by a little yapping cur, Canis Minor, a mongrel without courage or loyalty. Boy, he doesn't mince words here. By it, the ancient masters sought to convey the thought that those born under this section of the sky are particularly susceptible to domestic intrigue. They have strong emotions and may easily be carried away by them. Consequently, they should put forth a persistent effort to cultivate the qualities of faithfulness and poise. Through the activity of the emotional nature and their sensitiveness to all that affects life, they are often capable of remarkable poetic and dramatic expression. Unknown to themselves, often I suppose, they are mediums through which entities on the inner planes manifest. And because they are such perfect mediums, and you can certainly see this in the Cancer decade of Cancer, that this might be the case. They sometimes betray the trust placed in them, for they tend to yield to the temporarily strongest influence. They should learn to be positive and firm. So let's look at an example of somebody who has their sun in his chart, in this decade.
We should read the next C.C. Zane paragraph too, in conjunction with the one we just read.
It should not be inferred from this, however, that people born between June 22nd and July 2nd are less faithful in their family vows than others. Their love of home and their devotion to it is even remarkable. The changeableness to which they are subject relates to their feelings. Their emotions are like the tides of the sea, flowing in during one period, shortly to turn and flow out during another. Although the message the constellation conveys points to the dangers of moral laxity, the trait which most clearly distinguishes those born here when the sun is here is by the key word, which is moods. Yeah, thank you. I wanted to read that. So it's the decade of moods. So Christopher has picked a chart. We read that. And no, by the way, that one was taken from the Spiritual Astrology book. But you all know where these sections that are quotes from C.C. Zane about each decanate come from delineating the horoscope, the first two chapters in my book. Now here's a charming guy. Whoops. David Duke. Born in July, 1st of July, 1950. Anybody know who David Duke is?
He's familiar looking. White supremacist.
White supremacist.
From Louisiana?
Yes, from Louisiana. In fact, he says, he was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He's quoted as saying, "I don't call myself a white supremacist. I'm a civil rights activist concerned about European American rights." Okay. Well, we should probably take him at his word. I looked up some interesting things about Mr. Duke, which I'm going to read here, and then we're going to look at his chart. He's an American activist and writer and former Republican Louisiana state representative. He's also a former candidate in the Republican presidential primaries in 1992 and the Democratic presidential primaries in 1988. He unsuccessfully ran for Louisiana State Senate, U.S. House of Representatives, and Governor of Louisiana.
Whoa.
He's the former Grand Wizard of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. Duke describes himself as a racial realist, asserting that all people have a basic human right to preserve their own heritage. He is a strong advocate of opposition to Zionism, as well as what he asserts to be Zionist control of the Federal Reserve Bank, the federal government, and the media. Duke supports anti-immigration, both legal and illegal, preservation of what he labels Western culture and traditional Christian family values, strict constitutionalism, abolition of the Internal Revenue Service, voluntary racial segregation, ardent anti-communism, and white separatism. Well, so he's got some pretty strong and unusual views. He definitely is not a mainstream thinker. And when you read about his life, he's, it's just all over the place. While working in the White Youth Alliance, Duke met a lady named Slowey Harden, who became active in the group. They were married in '74. He has 2 daughters. It is claimed. Now, I took this out of Wikipedia. Okay, so
For what it's worth.
For what it's worth, because it talks about him being pursued female sex partners so avidly and so openly that it embarrassed many of his closest colleagues. Metzger, then Duke's state leader in California, became livid when he showed up at a Klan anti-immigrant border watch meeting or stunt and immediately started hitting on women. He was divorced in '84 because of that, no doubt. He had a lifelong weakness for gambling. So he's got some interesting weaknesses here. So if you look at his chart,
He's got Venus trine Mars.
right. I think the first thing I noticed was, I went to look for the fact that his sun is in that first decade of Cancer. So, we have no idea what his moods were like. I mean, just from what we haven't read a biography of him or autobiography, so we don't know about his moods. But we do know that he, first of all, he espoused some very unusual views, and as you can see, he's got Uranus in that. That's the most prominent aspect in the chart. See that? that conjunction with Uranus to the Sun in the first decan of Cancer. So that's the first thing I noticed. And then the second thing I noticed was what you said, Laura. You said
actually it's a grand trine.
that's right.
He's
Exactly. He's got a grand trine from Venus to Mars. So that, those are the social planets, right? Sex planets, whatever. And the moon in the fifth house, relating to women, and the fifth house relating to what? What's the fifth house rule?
Recreation.
Love affairs,
Lovers,
recreation,
yeah.
gambling.
Creativity.
Gambling.
Right.
So, now, does this make him a good candidate as an example of the moods decadent? Well, he espoused these such extreme. He's had certain weaknesses, first of all, that one might attribute to the more negative side of that decadent. But the other thing is, was he influenced by, what kind of influence? He seemed to come under these certain influences, and they just took hold of him, these ideas. And he went through his whole life this way.
But he kept, if that were true, somebody's philosophy could be as wishy-washy as their moods.
Yep, that's right.
And he seemed to latch on to some kind of fixation.
Right, apparently. I mean, I don't know that he ever disavowed any of his things. He ends up living in, I guess he's down in Louisiana. He was living in Austria for some reason. Yeah, no, that's the first thing I thought. Why?
Well, he's wearing it on his lapel. Or something.
Right, and that was in 2009. So, and he says, let's see, what did he say? He said, I'm not in Austria for any political activities. I just came to Austria to relax. The mountains are beautiful. The Austrian Alps are just beautiful. Blah
Maybe
blah
like
blah.
the beer.
Yeah.
Maybe you like the beer. He also did something real interesting. I don't know if I printed it out. He do claim to have spent 9 months in Laos, calling that a normal tour of duty. He actually went there when his father was working there, who asked him to visit him in the summer of '71. His father got him a job teaching English to Laotian military officers, from which he was dismissed after 6 weeks when he drew a Molotov cocktail on a blackboard. He also claimed to have gone behind enemy lines but this was disputed by 2 Air America pilots. Anyway, there's a question from the...
Some comments. Martha said from New Orleans, she said he's tall and good looking, and she'd seen him in stores in New Orleans. And Fred Michael says that the four planets in the Grand Trine are in angular houses in your system. An observation.
The Mars is in an angular house.
Right, but the Venus and the Moon
isn't.
are not.
No,
Are not just the Mars.
Yeah.
So
you could only have a grand square with, or a T-square with all 3 planets in
Yeah.
angular houses.
that would tend to be a
It's grand
square.
trine,
Yeah,
takes
depending
it out
upon
of
the
angular house.
yeah, depending upon the house. Either the Sun or Mercury. The Sun, Mercury, and Uranus are all 3 so powerful that it's hard to tell which one is dominant. Mercury actually has the most astrodynes, closely followed by the Sun and then Uranus. So, but that's the dominant configuration.
Gosh,
I
it's
think it was
disconcerting to look at a chart like this and realize that it's this sociopath's chart. kind of.
Right.
And yet it could also be, you know, a really attractive, famous movie star's chart. It
Sure.
could be, you know, a George, what's his face, Clooney chart or something like that.
Mhm.
How do you, go figure, you know? How do we know from looking at a chart how to read it?
Oh, well, and that's a very good question, because we're actually doing it backwards. Okay. You can't predict the specifics. For example, this thing up here can that complex right there can express an infinite number of ways. Okay, literally. But they all are characteristic of having a dominant sun conjunct Uranus, the planet of, you know, the unusual, eccentric, outstanding, up in the 10th house where it gets a lot of publicity. And so that's what you know. You know, you can, if you didn't know who this is.
Too, so
and
he's probably articulate and
exactly. Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's how he got to be the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. You know.
Right.
And he was actually a state representative one time. I mean, he could talk, and he was a good-looking guy. And then you'd look at some of these other, you know, you'd go through the house, each one, you know, you'd follow certain steps. When you got around to interpreting the Grand Trine, well, you don't know. You'd say that this thing about his religion and philosophy, okay, his personality, and his interest in having a good time are all very closely related. And he has a lot of luck with them. He has luck with women. He probably didn't have luck with gambling, because that's really hard. But he certainly has. But, you know, he spends a lot of time. The women are easy to gambling is stacked against you. But, you know, women, they want to have a good time too, so what the heck. So he gets cooperation there, but he doesn't get any cooperation from the house when it comes to gambling, right? I mean, he may win some, but eventually you're going to lose.
He could have been, you know, very much, the Neptune conjunct Mars there could have made him really an idealistic, you know, romantic, and at the same time he could have been really deluded about his own role as a man.
Right.
You know.
Right. And I think you just delineated that perfectly. He was those things. Mm-hmm. He was probably very idealistic, even if his views were so outlandish.
Right,
you know.
God on his side.
Right. Absolutely. And when you interpret the moon in the 5th house, when you interpret that Grand Trine, you don't know whether that's going to be children or women, whether that's going to express through, you know, having lots of children. I mean, that's a barren, 2 barren signs there. So he did have two daughters, but and those, who knows? We don't know any of the details of his life. I mean, this thing that was written up that I just got out of Wikipedia because it was the fastest thing. Doesn't really give you a complete picture of who he is. I mean, so you interpret that moon in the 5th house in relationship to those other planets in the sign Aquarius. It could be one of a number of things, but you know it's going to be one of those things, and it's going to be something that's important in the person's life. Yeah.
Vicky put in, if this is the old dog trade decadent, then could one conclude that hanging out with the KKK might lead him into questionable activities?
Well, yeah.
Canis Minor is the old dog trade, isn't it?
Yes.
The company you keep.
Right. Old dog Trey got in trouble because he was, you know, he was just wanted to be with his friends, and he got in trouble. So that is a key question that you just asked. That's a very important concept for people to know when they're learning astrology. Is that, you know, you can give a very good delineation of a chart, not knowing who it is, and then when you get to it, now you can see how those specific things actually manifest. And then, you know, for example, if you don't know who it is and you don't know any details, you can say you can propose specific remedies for some aspects that may be discordant in the chart. But once you know who the person is and the familiarities of their life, you can then be more specific in what you do and what you say.
One of the few things we haven't mentioned is it's a little bit loose, but there's an opposition between Jupiter and Saturn. What do you mean?
Well,
by that?
it's let's see, it's 7.
Well, yeah.
It's 7. It's actually over 7 degrees, but for an opposition, that would definitely be an orb. And it also see, the sun mediates that opposition, probably
It's
in
sextiles and trines,
orb
right?
of a 6-degree orb of being sextile here, and then it's a trine to Jupiter in the 6th. He's got a lot of interesting aspects, and it would be interesting to look at progressions at certain periods of his life and see what kind of progressions he was under. So anyway, well, let's move ahead
Is there a
here.
name for that triangular aspect where an opposition is mediated by a sextile and a trine?
Is that a yod or no?
A what?
The yod splits evenly two inconjuncts.
There probably is, but I don't know what it is.
Just wondered, he almost has one between, that is too loose to be an opposition, the Pluto Leo with the Moon Aquarius. But look at Neptune in there, it almost it does sextile the Leo, but it's out of orb a bit but in other words, he's almost got one of those same formations, those same triangles, that we see more exactly between Saturn, Jupiter,
So
and
I didn't even notice this. He's got
Yeah.
a swastika on his.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's an extreme character. Extreme character.
but he's walking the streets now. He's not incarcerated, right?
Well, he hasn't broken any laws. People can think whatever they
He
want.
certainly inspired other people, though, to do some heinous things.
He
was
may
the
have,
grand
I don't know.
inspiration behind the guy who murdered the abortion doctor in church.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
And he does have Saturn in the. Maybe Jupiter opposed it, made him lucky to stay out of prison and be able to mind his legality enough to be a free man, despite his. I mean, those are ideas that are really considered subversive, are they not? Dangerously subversive.
Well, subversive meaning will
I
not.
guess that has to mean to our government.
Yeah, it has to be to our to the overthrow.
To governmental
He's
ideas,
probably yeah.
I mean, that idea of voluntary segregation is an intriguing one. Maybe that's how he stayed out of jail. Yeah, let's make the racism voluntary.
Right.
Enough people will go along with it.
Okay, well, let's move on to the second decadent. Those born between July 2nd and July 12th, which is the Scorpio decadent of Cancer, and corresponds to the constellation Hydra. The Hydra is a huge water serpent which extends its length a third of the way around the celestial sphere all the way to Scorpio. The key word is revelation. And the spiritual text, which comes from the spiritual astrology book, not through slaying desire, but through sublimating it to a higher plane of manifestation, does man make soul progress. Well, the water serpent, serpents have to do with sex, wisdom, even death. Let's move along here. Yeah, it's a big constellation. Goes all the way from Cancer to Scorpio. So, and C.C. Zane does point out that the fact that it is such a large constellation must mean something, that it's that is important. Most prominent star, core Hydra, also known as, I don't know what this is, Alpha RD. The most prominent, yeah. That's not normally how they characterize stars.
By magnitude?
Well, yeah, it's the second magnitude star, but the way they number stars in constellations, they go alpha, beta, gamma, delta. So it's like the first brightest star in Aries is Alpha Arietis.
Oh.
So the brightest star in Hydra would be Alpha Hydranus or something, whatever the Latin
I see.
term is. So that's how astronomers.
So where would Ptolemy have gotten his assignation to Saturn and Venus?
He assigned it the qualities of Saturn and Venus, or wisdom and beauty. Well, he may have discovered it. He may have made it up. He was a great, one of the things, he was a great astronomer, mathematician. I mean, he's up there with like Newton. I mean, he's Newton and Einstein, really. I mean, he would have been a Newton Einstein if he had discovered that that
we were
revolving around the sun instead of the other way around.
So, but that was Copernicus. And
that was Copernicus. Actually, there's a number of different people that Copernicus is the most well known. But I mean, it was proposed way back, even in the time of the Greeks, that hey, this. But the common belief was what you saw is that you saw. It looked like everybody was revolving around us. And so he had to figure out that he actually produced ephemerides of planetary positions that went out so far. And he developed these horrendously complex equations to predict where the position, and constantly had to adjust them, right? And because the planets all had these epicycles.
Elliptical.
Well, they have epicycles. See, when you see them, actually, when you're watching the apparent movement of a planet, it goes one way most of the time, but then sometimes it goes backwards.
Yeah.
And then it stops, then it goes back forwards again. And that actually sort of looks like what he called an epicycle.
Oh, boy. That would be hard to explain.
It's very hard to explain, and it's very hard to predict.
Poor guy.
Yeah, he really had it tough.
Yeah.
But in doing so, he developed some real... He made great inroads into mathematics. He was a tremendous mathematician and an astronomer, an observational astronomer. I mean, he's well, even though he was into astrology, he's very well respected in science, in history of science. Very well respected. But he also brought together, that was a culmination of astrology before, the Christian era set in the Dark Ages. That was it. That was the peak of Hellenistic Egypt. That's where he was. He was in Egypt. He was a Greek. The Greeks were they were all hanging around Alexandria. And that's where he was. That was the center. That was the center of knowledge and culture. Science and culture was in Alexandria. What we refer to as Hellenistic Egypt, because it was really the Greeks that controlled Egypt at that time. And so you see a lot of the astrology, the early astrology of the, when you go there and you go to all the interesting places where you see the astrological things all over the architecture, you can see the early stuff that was that the Egyptians had done, but then then you see the Greek influence come in, and it was all Greek after that. So Ptolemy took and brought all of this stuff together. All the stuff, because astrology had made great strides since about 300 BC. They were really starting to cook, and astrology becoming a really usable science, art science, because when the Greeks got a hold of it. So from that period, 300 BC to 150 AD, when Ptolemy, he brought together, he put stuff, he wrote the Almagest. He wrote this big, huge treatise on astrology that is formed the basis from then on for astrology. And not all of these were his ideas. He tried to bring everything together. Whether, he said, I haven't tested a lot of this stuff, but here's what they say, and he put it all together to pass on. Anyway, let's move on.
It had strong passions which could lead to immortality. That was the last sentence. Immorality. Oh,
I think so.
oops, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
But
Well-
that's referring to the star.
Oh yes, yes. That's what Ptolemy said, right? And a lot of people use fixed stars, and so back then they had assigned certain attributes to the key stars. And so when you did a chart, and some people still do this today, they use the fixed stars. They actually put the position of certain key stars in the chart where they fall, and each one has certain qualities about it depending upon the house that it falls in.
That's where, what's the guy's name? Edgerton? Somebody who interprets the fixed star, they almost always quote this guy whose name starts with an E. And the associations with the fixed stars are very, very often quite negative and
Some of them are pretty bad. Yes, right. Because, and that goes way back to the beginning of astrology, before the Greeks, when they were, catastrophic events happened a lot more often than really good things. The really good thing was staying out of trouble. That was a really good day, right? 1000 BC, 2000 BC.
Yeah.
You just
what they call, may you have an
eventless day, keeping your head above water, got enough food for the day, all that stuff. Right, exactly. So and especially, for the kings, when something horrendous would happen, war, famine, whatever it was, they would associate that with the most prominent star or certain planetary configurations. And so you can, it makes sense that they would tend to be kind of negative. Now, on the back of Hydra, the way it's classically pictured, you can find two other constellations. One is Crater, the drinking vessel, and Corvus, the crow or raven, right here. So he's feasting off the flesh of Hydra, which is what ravens like to do. And but there's also the crater here, which I've never thought of as a drinking vessel, more a vessel of containing hot coals and fire and stuff like that. They form a story of mythology. Okay, well, so we're going to talk about that later.
Because those are two decanates of Leo right there. Right?
Yes, those are two decanates of Leo, exactly. Mm-hmm.
But they're the first and the third, are they not?
Corvus, the raven, is the third decanate. And
Crater's
Crater is the first. Yeah.
So what would be the second decanate of Leo then?
The second decanate of Leo is, which is the Sagittarius decanate, is
Centaurus.
I think it is Centaurus. Yes. So
And that's not Centaurus down below. I would just
I don't think
expect
so.
Centaurus to be in that picture if Crater and Corvus are.
well, the thing is, it's Centaurus, and I don't remember where Centaurus is,
It's going to be.
but
way
it can
south.
be way north or south, and so it's
Right.
not in the picture. Whereas, and I haven't ever checked this, it could be that Corvus and Crater, those two constellations, are very close together, nearby. But probably not. Let's see, which direction are we going? We're going this direction.
Yeah.
So, longitudinally, this is the middle decanate of Cancer, and then there's the third decanate, which is going to be Argo, the constellation Argo, which is somewhere north. But if you actually go look at the stars and look at the longitude of the first of the constellation, or the first bright star in the constellation, you'll see that they do follow that order all the way along, although some of them are way north or way south.
Is that Leo there, tucked under his upper village?
No, that looks like a rabbit. And that is probably that's probably Lupus. I'm sorry, Lepus, which is a decanate of Taurus. But, this is a very stylized drawing, obviously. I don't know how accurate it is. It does have the stars in the background. But I'd have to go, and it's got the, you can see how it has these things that are drawn, those lines?
Yeah.
Astronomers, even modern day astronomers, have divided up the sections, so that all the sky is divided up into sections like this, most of which they've actually invented some new constellations and added a section to make sure everything's covered.
Wow.
So
Sounds like the argument that's going on in our state legislature right now about representation, about proper delineation of areas so that they get fairly represented.
as opposed to gerrymandering, that's what they call it when gerrymandering is when they draw the lines just right so that
It skews the
it
votes.
skews the vote.
Right,
That's
right.
practically going on in every state right now.
Yeah, it sure is.
It's a huge scramble.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay. Let's move on here. The author David Ulansey, in his book The Origins of Mythologic Mysteries, Cosmology and Salvation in the Ancient World, that's the name of his book, has identified the tripartite constellation of Hydra, Crater, and Corvus to be central symbols found in Mithraeum, underground ceremonial chambers scattered across the ancient Roman world. Okay, that's very interesting. And
Well, they would be at the height of summertime, pretty much. They'd be defining an extreme part of the year.
well, the sun, when the sun gets when it gets to 0 degrees Cancer, that's
the start of summer.
That's the summer solstice, right? So the sun, during the time that it's in Cancer and Leo, of course you can't see those constellations, right? Because what you see is the sun. You have to wait till the other side of the year to see them.
But it might have had something to do with harvest stuff, because that's when the plants really have to be growing well in order to ensure a harvest for the whole next year. Crater, Corvus, Hydra.
Well, Crater, has more to do with the strong heart and emotional nature of people born in that first decade of Leo, the Leo decade. That's what it's trying to portray. It's just talking about particular characteristics of those people that are born there. And then the decade of, and then the raven, Corvus, which is the third, that's a decade of ambition. So people born there tend to be, they can get along fine. Like with Noah's Ark, the ravens didn't have any problem at all. And it just shows that raven feasting on the back of, because it can eat dead stuff. In Greek mythology is another story associated with Hydra, which is about Hercules, his second labor. The Hydra was a 9-headed serpent and was supposed to be immortal. So what did he do?
Burned.
Well,
was that the one where every time you chopped it off, 2 heads would grow back?
Yeah.
And so didn't he have to cauterize him?
He had to cauterize him.
Yeah.
Right. But there was one main one, I think.
Yeah,
And using his club by uprooting it, he bashed the heads of the Hydra, only discovered that 2 would grow in their place. Upon seeing that, Hercules was being overwhelmed by Hydra's multiple heads. His nephew, Iolaus, I remember that, sprang into action, cauterizing the severed heads to prevent growth, until only the immortal head remained, which he just whacked off. He buried it under a rock, symbolized by the pole star. But, the stories of Hydra have to do with, typically whenever you're wrestling with a serpent, like Ophiuchus does, in the constellation Ophiuchus, which is a Scorpio decade, wrestling with a serpent, it usually has to do with sex.
In that picture, you got a scorpion by Hercules' heel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, you sure do. By golly. So, moving right along here.
Hercules is like quite a bell.
Scorpion turned into a crab.
Yeah, he's standing on a crab.
So why did Hera send a giant crab to bite at Hercules' feet?
Well, Hera was usually jealous,
Hera was almost always jealous.
so that might be some kind of clue.
But what was he doing? He was just killing Hydra. Is Hydra one of her special pets or something? I don't know that story.
She was probably mad at Zeus. She was mad at Zeus for some reason. So
Yeah, it's probably mad at Zeus, so she took it out on Hercules. So the water serpent commences the middle decan of Cancer and extends through the sky all the way around to Scorpio, the constellation of sex and death. Decadent of the domestic sign, those born under it possess much resource and energy as well as being strong-like. So this is the Scorpio. This is the sex decadent of the sign of Cancer. So representing the Scorpio or sex decadent of the domestic sign, those born under it possess much resource and energy, as well as being strongly emotional. Okay, that's from delineating the horoscope. Then The serpent is the symbol of creative energy, and the water in which it dwells is the symbol of strong emotions displayed by these people. So the traditional struggle of Hercules with his monster is not without significance, for it represents the struggle with sensual desires, as well as the struggle to overcome the limitations imposed by death. So that's the whole of the text from delineating the horoscope about that. Oh, but there's more. Thus we find those born here have a natural aptitude for communion with those who have passed to the spirit side of life. Scorpio, of course, rules the 8th house, which has to do with spirit communion. And if they do not fall into the destructive forms of mediumship, but instead retain at all times full control of their bodies and minds, they are led, impressed, and guided from the spirit side of life in all their worthy undertakings.
What'd you say about 8th house? It has to do with spirit
Communion. Yeah. Interplaying friends and death and legacies that come through death and relatives who passed on. All that kind of stuff is what the 8th house is about. Mm-hmm. In addition to other people's money, partners' money. You know, it's the 2nd house of the partner. The 7th house is the partner, which is the 1st house of the partner. So you can interpret the partner from the 7th house, their character. And then the partner's money is the 2nd house, is the 8th house. Keep going around to the 9th house, that's the 3rd house of the partner.
Oh.
And then the 10th house is the 4th house of the partner. Huh. And you can do that with brothers and sisters, siblings starting with the 3rd house, children starting with the 5th house. The 10th house, representing the mother, is the 1st house of the mother. 4th house is the 1st house of the father.
Interesting. Never heard that.
And if you take a chart and take your own chart, this is fascinating.
Turn it to the ascendant, right?
Pardon?
You just turn the chart, make that the ascendant.
That's right. That's exactly right. That becomes the first chart, and then you read. Do this with your own chart. This is amazing. You'll be amazed. I've always been amazed at how well it works. It's incredible. You take and you look at the influence of a sibling or a parent or some prominent big friend or something, and look at that all the way around to see. It's very interesting.
So, can you give an example? Say it is a sibling.
Okay.
So you go to the 3rd house and you turn the chart so that that's the first.
That's the 1st house of the sibling. So then the 4th house is their 2nd house. So if you got Saturn in the 4th, they have Saturn in their 2nd. Now they don't in their real chart, but you'll see it in their life. They may not have Saturn in the 2nd, but they may have something, And very often, like if you take, this is especially true with the 7th house, being an angular house. More important is the partner is described by the planets in that house. The partner is described by those planets, meaning the overall nature of the character and personality and appearance of the spouse is whatever planets rule that are in the house or rule the house, and then whatever. And so you find the ruler of the house, and then you look at the planets that strongly aspect that, and that should describe the partner. And then you just move around the house. You can do it like we said with a sibling or with a parent or a child, starting with the 5th house. And that's pretty standard astrology too. Okay, so then Hercules saw the
back there.
abnormal growths, whatever that is, by securing the aid of a companion.
Those were the clone heads that grew
When
up
he
and-
clubbed off one of the unseemly heads, Lolaeus seared it with it. We already, okay. The final head All right, he buried under the pole star. Well, I already read that, didn't I?
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. Whatever may be the unseemly desires within the unconscious mind, they cannot successfully be repressed. So, the key word here, if we cut to the chase, as they say, and we go down here to the spiritual text. This comes from the spiritual astrology book. Not through slaying desire, and this is very appropriate for this decadent where Hercules is wrestling the Hydra. The serpent is not through slaying desire, but through sublimating it to a higher plane of manifestation. And the story, as the story goes, the idea of trying to slay the desire or trying to repress those things which you think are are inappropriate behavior, right? I mean, you have certain sexual desires that you have to repress, right? So you do that by you repress it. The cutting off of one of this Hydra's heads is representative of repressing that desire, because what happens? 2 more heads come out somewhere else.
It's interesting because it's just like when you prune a plant.
Mm-hmm.
That happens. You cut
Right.
out one and it bifurcates, and 2
Right.
sprouts
Yeah,
come
that
from
often
that
happens.
branch.
Right. Okay, so who is the mystery second decadent Cancer Sun person?
Oh my goodness.
Well, shouldn't,
Okay,
because the glyphs are wrong up there though. It should be Cancer, Scorpio.
those are wrong, yes.
Yeah. But,
Yeah.
Okay. But
Yeah, well, the chart got copied and forgot to be changed, but
Okay.
yeah, those glyphs are wrong. So George Bush is born in the Hydra Decadent. Okay, which is let's see. Good God, there's a lot of stuff on Hydra. Okay, so he's born in the Scorpio Decadent, but the key word for that Scorpio Decadent is revelation. Wonder why. Okay, so Bush was born 1946. If we look, this is a quote from him. That's the most significant thing that happened during his presidency. It was 9/11, of course, and pretty much shaped his whole presidency. But he's a very interesting character. I looked at some stuff about him also in Wikipedia, but we'll take a quick look at his chart. His sun there is at 13 degrees Cancer, so it's in the Scorpio Decadent of Cancer in the 12th house. So I wonder how we would interpret that. Any suggestion? Well, the 12th house is what? Restrictions and disappointments. Those 2 words pretty well sum it up. Is it a bad house? Well, no. But people, somebody with their sun there, their sense of self-esteem and significance comes through trying to overcome the limitations or restrictions and disappointments that occur in the life. And they probably in some way relate to this Cancer Decadent, this Scorpio Decadent in Cancer, which is the Decadent of Revelation. Who else is in that decadent? Another interesting thing. Let's come back to that. I'm jumping to things, so this is not the way you're supposed to design a chart, but it's kind of interesting that I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but his dominant planet is Mercury, and it's right on. What is one of the things that he's known for? His sort of personality, character when he talks. It's how he talks.
Yeah, but he misused words, and I mean, he was kind of a doomcock.
His dominant planet is Mercury.
That's amazing.
Intellectual planet
Is
of
it
communication. Well, look, it's exalted in Aquarius, the opposite
So
sign
it
of
is
Leo, and it's in
afflicted.
its fall in Leo.
It's cool.
And so that is a big thing for him. It's very prominent. And I have the same thing. I have dominant Mercury that's in Leo. And it makes you tongue-tied sometimes. And it comes out, expresses different ways, but it makes him look kind of, many times not very expressive.
Yeah, Leo's a sign of
Not
expression.
lack of intelligence. And,
Leo's a sign of expression.
It is?
Well, sign of
Yeah,
war.
creative expression. Leo?
Oh, creative. But that's creative expression. That's not communication like Gemini.
Right. Right.
But he talks from his heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He talks from his heart. And his whole presidency was shaped by this 9/11 thing. Well, what did he do? How did he? This was a huge.
He talked like he was God. He talked like God was.
He had a revelation.
God's word was revealed through him.
He had a revelation.
Yeah.
This was the most. I mean, it was a huge disappointment. In a sense, I mean, it was a huge catastrophe that during his presidency, 9/11 happened. Did you guys get to see all the stuff that, the 10-year anniversary? Did you see all that stuff on TV? Oh my God, it's unbelievable. What a horrendous event. It just boggles the mind. It's one of the most horrendous events in history. I mean, it is really something. And that happened during. So the fact that he's got this in his 9th house, in his 12th house here, and then what does he do? Well, he goes to he attacks Afghanistan, but he has this vision of revolutionizing the entire Middle East.
That was long before 9/11.
And it's a very complicated thing with him because it was, they say it goes back to his father, but why didn't we go in and get Saddam Hussein? Here we had an opportunity. Well, now he's got an opportunity, and he's very devout. He's a very devout, born again Christian, so he can see an opportunity to do something really big here.
He also wanted to finish his father's work in that way, I think.
Well, that's what a lot of people say, and that may be. I doubt that really had that much to do with it, but it may have. I mean, it may have been a factor. I think he had a bigger vision than that.
I think he was the repetitively disappointing son to his father.
Could
who
be,
had
yes.
to prove himself over and over again and would somehow try to best his father to save his own self-esteem.
Yeah, in fact, they went in. I remember an interview where they asked him, "Well, who did you turn to?" With 9/11. I mean, I think this going into Iraq, it was about, did you discussed this with your father, right? No, I discussed it with that guy. That's what he said.
His sun squares Neptune, so it's not quite within North, but squares Neptune, so it's easy for him to think he's talking to God. To be able to not be quite clear of what he's talking to, but
Yeah, it might not be quite an orb. Depends on how wide orbs you use. It's 8 degrees.
yeah, I mean, it's wide.
8 and
but-
5 is 13. It's less than 8 degrees. And the orb for that, for the sun in a cadent house, is probably for a square, 12, 10, 8. Might be 8. It might barely be an orb.
Yeah,
It is barely an orb, Sun square Neptune. So,
people do not see things very clearly.
Yeah, and to be deluded by his own idealism and
Right.
all that.
Right. But he had sure could pull it off. He has a lot of charisma in his first house, doesn't he?
yeah, he's got all that Leo.
Yeah, Venus and
Yeah,
He's got all that Leo.
Pluto, he can
He's
talk
supposed
like
to
he has
be,
clout.
but when you're, I'll tell you something. Elton John. How do you think Elton John would feel? I mean, given where Elton John is in the world and what his philosophy might be, how would you think he would feel about somebody like Bush?
Pretty dismissive, probably.
Yeah, right. But Elton John, I saw an interview of him, and they said, and they were talking about his life, and they said, you accepted an award, special award from George Bush. Why did you do that? And he said, George Bush is a very charming man.
Oh, I've heard that over and over from people in his circle.
Right.
But yeah, yeah.
So, the last decanate, Argo.
But I think
Research.
he was known to depend upon his charm to get over the problems of not being well educated on a subject or
Exactly.
being inept.
Right.
He could charm his way through a whole lot.
Right. Although, he graduated from Yale, and then he went to Harvard Business School, got an MBA from Harvard.
Yeah, but he was in his daddy's fraternity the whole way through.
Well, yeah. That's true. Well, I never thought of him as stupid. He just has that. He had that. Another guy is. Oh my God, what's his name? Who's the quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he went on to be. He was on CBS and Fox as a as a sports commentator, but he's made movies. Huh? No. You know what his name is, Barb? He won 4 Super Bowls. He's the only quarterback to ever win 4 Super Bowls, and he's been in some really great movies. They always said when he was playing football he was stupid because of the way he talked.
Oh.
That's it.
And he had Mercury in Leo.
I don't know whether it did or not, but it's the same kind of thing, that how you express yourself has a lot to, has a big effect on people. And they always said, oh, he's stupid. Well, he went on to win 4 Super Bowls, the only person that's ever done that. Huh?
Not Joe Namath.
No.
Not Johnny.
Huh?
With Pittsburgh Steelers?
Yeah. And then, is a very successful, he's just been tremendously successful after his tremendous football career. And everybody loves the guy.
All over the country.
And, huh? Yeah.
Restaurants all over the
Oh, no, I don't think he does any of that.
Oh.
No, he may have some businesses, but none that I've ever heard of. He's been in a number of movies, and
Tom Brady?
no, that's the New England Patriots.
Terry Bradshaw?
Terry Bradshaw.
Nice.
Terry Bradshaw.
Good, Michelle.
But it's kind of like a thing with yes, thank you for that, Michelle. Terry Bradshaw.
That just says Bradshaw.
As everybody saying Bradshaw, Bradshaw.
Everybody's forgetting.
Yeah, I don't know why I couldn't think of his name. I see him all the time. Love him football. He's a great guy. So there you are. Anyway, the third decanate is Argo. I guess its whole name is Argo Navis. I never knew that, but it's a ship, and I think that's what it means. The ship Argo. The ship that carries a crew through the tempestuous sea to safety. It's the key word for the decanate is research. The spiritual text, poised is the one safe haven of the soul. Therefore, under all circumstances, keep an even mind. That's like an even keel. So, this is also a large constellation. Apparently, 18th century astronomers found it too unwieldy, so they dismantled it into 3 sections. Majority of it falls in the Milky Way, which means it's hard to see. Canopus is second brightest star in the night sky after Sirius. It's got a very bright star, sometimes called the spectral gem of the southern skies. So, it's not visible above latitudes above 37 degrees. So, our latitude here is what? Must be getting close to 40 here. 37, 38. Well, Oklahoma is about 30. Tulsa, Oklahoma is 36, so we must be around 37 degrees. So this is some place that it's not visible to people north of Albuquerque.
Well, it says there it's entirely in the southern hemisphere.
Well, it says it's not visible to places north of 37 degrees. From latitudes, it's not visible from latitudes north above 37.18. So it's visible probably all the way down. Yeah, if you're in the southern hemisphere, you can probably see it as long as you're not below 37 degrees south or something like latitude, something like that. We talked about that.
Is that latitude or longitude? 37
That's-
degrees.
That's latitude, north or south. As in all Greek mythology, legends vary as to the builder of the ship. Jason, Argus, Glaucus, and Hercules, you're right, Hercules, are all mentioned. However, it gains its name from Argus. The fame of the ship varies from it being the first vessel to ever set out to sea to being the ship that bore Jason and the Argonauts to the shores of Colchis in the search of the Golden Fleece. Curiously, only the aft of the ship is pictured with keel and rudder. The prow of the boat is shrouded in mists, which makes it pretty spooky. The 50 Argonauts were led by Jason and aided by Athena, who created the bow of the ship from a piece of oracular oak of Dodona. All this is fascinating.
Talking prow. That's an interesting metaphor.
Hmm?
Talking prow is an interesting metaphor. Gee, you'd think that would be revelation.
Yeah.
When the prow collapsed, killing him. And later years, Jason returned to Corinth and sat beneath the decaying hulk of the Argo, reminiscing on events past when the prow collapsed. Only the rear of the ship is pictured. Fascinating. Didn't know that. Apparently this is a constellation familiar to ancient Egyptians, saw it as a barge that bore Isis and Osiris through the deluge. What deluge? Well, the big deluge. And for Christian astronomers, it became associated with Noah's Ark.
What's the symbolism of the golden fleece, do you think?
I don't know. I've forgotten.
Zane knows
you know,
have something to say about it. Zane will have something to say about it, right?
Well, like when we get to Pisces, Cassiopeia is, you know, there's two stories about her. One is aiding
Is that the very last vicissitudes decadent of Pisces?
Yes, that's a vicissitude decadent. Queen on her throne is the sex decadent, the sign of imprisonment. And mythology attributes the imprisonment of her daughter to the pride of this queen and her beauty. Cassiopeia was the mother of Andromeda. However, in another story, she is the queen who furnished her children with the ram that bore the golden fleece and carried them to heaven.
Oh.
So, it's a complicated story. We'll have to find out more. Stay tuned.
Mm-hmm.
So, what Zane says in delineating the horoscope is this. The constellated ship that gave foundation to this story, both the Noah's Ark and the adventurous Argonautic expedition. There will be stormy seas in the lives of those born here, but a tranquil mind will prove an adequate ark to carry them to the shores of safety. They are restless and somewhat discontented. While loving domestic life, yet they are also eager to learn what is just below the horizon. Their curiosity, however, becomes an asset and leads them into fields that are all too little known. They are great lovers of Mother Nature, take keen delight in spying out her secrets, and in this kind of work find their greatest natural aptitude. Have you guys, how many of you have looked at the decadent that the sun, your sun is in and your moon and ascendant?
Mm-hmm.
Have you had a chance to do that? I mean, mine always amazes me. I've always thought that it's one of the most important things of any delineation that you do for a person is to look at those three decanates. You can even look at the decanate that the dominant planet's in.
Mm-hmm.
And you can even look, if you want to, weave a story in a more of a, not a scientific astrology, but more of a, fortune-telling type. You can take the decadent that any planet's in and let that stimulate you and build a story around that in a person's chart. It's kind of interesting. But I found that the sun, moon, and ascendant things are often, very telling of a person's larger life, So anyway, from spiritual astrology, Zane writes, Argo encourages rather than disparages the effort at research into the forces and regarding the entities of the invisible plane, a tendency outstanding among those born while the sun is in this section of the Zodiac, but it also offers wise counsel as to the method by which such voyages can be attempted in safety. Each mariner should keep his hand firmly on the helm. The text, consequently, is poise is the one safe haven of the soul. Therefore, under all circumstances, keep an even mind. Keep an even keel. Okay, who's our mystery guest? Our mystery guest is...
Oh, for heaven's sake, it's Ginger Rogers.
Ginger Rogers. Born in Independence, Mo. 1911. July 16th. And her famous, we've all heard this, but it's great to hear it again. Speaking of Fred Astaire. Sure, he was great, but don't forget, Ginger Rogers did everything he did backwards and in high heels. She was really something. And those movies with her and Fred Astaire is incredible. The dancing and everything. They're amazing. I didn't have a chance to look in her life much. But I did print some stuff out. She was born, let's see, an American actress, dancer, singer who appeared in film, on stage, radio throughout much of the 20th century. During her long career, she made 73 films. Is noted for her roles in Fred Astaire's romantic. Is noted for her role as Fred Astaire's romantic interest and dancing partner in a series of 10 Hollywood films that revolutionized the genre. She also achieved great success in a variety of films. She won an Academy Award for Best Actress for the movie I've never heard of, Kitty Foyle, in 1940. And she ranks number 14 on the AFI's, I don't know what that is, 100 Years, 100 Stars list of actress screen legends. She's up there at the top. She was born Virginia Catherine McMath, daughter of an electrical engineer. Father and wife was Leila Imogene Owens. But her mother remarried a guy named Rogers, and she took on the name Rogers, though she was never adopted. And then she came up with the name Ginger. Her entertainment career was born one night when the traveling vaudeville act of Eddie Foy came to Fort Worth and needed a quick stand-in. She then entered in one. So I guess she was in. She then entered one of Charleston dance contests, which allowed her to tour for 6 months. At one point in 1926, performing at an 18-month-old theater called the Criterion in Medford, Oregon. This theater honored her many years later by changing its name to Criterion Ginger Rogers Theater. At 17, she marries Jack Culpepper, a singer, dancer, comedian, recording artist of the day who worked under the name Jack Pepper. She, according to her autobiography, she knew him as a child. She was her cousin's boyfriend. One thing leads to another.
Did she stay married? 17 is young.
Oh no, I think it said it only lasted a few months.
Oh.
It mentions, let's see. Rogers' first movie roles were in a trio of short films made in 1929, Night in the Dormitory, A Day of the Man of Affairs, Campus Sweetheart. She soon got herself out of the Paramount contract under which she had made 5 feature films, and moved with her mother to Hollywood. She signed a 3-picture deal with Pathé, whoever that is. This is way back in the 30s. In her second RKO picture, Flying Down to Rio, she worked for the first time with Fred Astaire. Note, however, that the Wikipedia entry for Embraceable You claims that they worked together previously on a stage production of Girl Crazy. Okay, so the announcement of Astaire-Rogers screen partnership from the trailer to Flying Down to Rio. Oh, that's the picture. She was most... blah, blah, blah. We know all that. She was Astaire's finest dance partner, principally because of her ability to combine dancing skills, natural beauty, and exceptional abilities as a dramatic actress and comedian. You know, the interesting thing is, I didn't see anything in here where she had any kind of a formal training of any kind. She was just a natural. she could sing and dance and act. It just came naturally to her. That's amazing. So, if we look at her chart, without going through all the steps of delineation, anything stand out to you? She's clearly got her sun in the third decan of Cancer down there in the second house, conjunct Neptune. So that's a pretty powerful, it's a prominent configuration.
And isn't it opposing her Uranus up there?
Kind of looks like it, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. And then Saturn is sextile those planets, and the moon up there in the 10th house is trine those planets and square the ascendant. And so the moon, and it's amazing how many famous people, especially in the entertainment industry, have a moon up in the 10th or a dominant moon.
What would be the significance of those squared in the ascendant?
I don't know. I suspect that that her maybe her fluctuating moods or something had some impact on her personality. That's how I would interpret it. But I don't know. And in fact, she has a dominant moon. Followed by the sun down there in that decanate. So this is the decanate of research. So why is Ginger... I wonder how Ginger Rogers exemplifies that decanate. Well, probably because she... My guess here is that she, given where she started and where she ended up, she was always looking beyond the horizon for the next interesting thing to do. Right? I mean, she couldn't have been shy. She must have been pretty dynamic her entire life. And
that might be part of the square of the ascendant to the moon. If a Pisces moon is very sensitive and sometimes prone to lack of self-worth or...
Yes.
So perhaps the square, the challenge of her ascendant sort of, thrust her forth into overcoming that withering side of her nature and putting herself out there.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
it is trying. It is trying the sun. So that's a really good aspect.
Yeah.
That's a really nice
that's
aspect.
beautiful.
Yeah.
And that can pull that sun energy out into the public eye too, through
Right.
the moon. Yeah.
Right.
I saw an interview of her as an old lady. I don't know if she's still alive. I haven't heard that she died, but she was so over made up. So, I contrasted it with seeing an interview of Lauren Bacall or somebody who'd grown old gracefully.
Right.
And oh my God, it was
terrible,
just pitiful. It was comical the way she looked. Really.
And that is so...
That
so
Sun Neptune thing,
right. Well, she may be in La La Land.
Dear.
Who knows? You don't... She may not... She may be suffering from...
It really seemed,
But that's
over the top.
so common,
But there it is, that Sun Neptune's opposed Uranus, so it could have been over the top. Her over the topness may have worked in her own benefit for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
but it sure wasn't. By the way, she tried to present her image at the end of her life. It was very sad. That was just my opinion. She was charming during the interview and everything. But she looked like a wizened up, painted doll.
Question from the
Vicky makes a comment. She says, my understanding is Fred Astaire wasn't always easy to get along with, and she seemed to maintain her voice throughout that whole period.
Okay, well that sounds like that decadent, you
Yeah.
know.
It does indeed.
Somebody else is the ruler of her, of water, you know, very fluid. And it's kind of like a boat on water, that decadent of voice.
Well, she had, you know, I can picture her. She had there was something very in her personality, and it's not bossy, but she was a person of significance that came out. In other words, when she interacted with Fred Astaire and when she interacted with other people on the screen, it was like she was in control of things. And so she was feminine and in control at the same time. And I think that's that trine between her moon and her sun that comes out like that.
Well, also, the Fred Astaire was a Taurus, and she was Saturn, Mars, and Taurus. She could keep him in line.
Fred Astaire was a Taurus, huh? Yeah, she's got Mars and Saturn and Taurus.
It would be interesting to compare their chart.
Yeah, it would be real interesting.
Yeah.
Because if we were going to look at what planet in the chart would represent Fred Astaire? My guess, well, I would look at Fred, Fred's her partner.
So you see the Saturn.
Now, I don't know if that's really true.
So you go to Jupiter?
So then you'd go to Jupiter. That might be the wrong house, but that'd be my first guess.
Well, but maybe not.
Where
I mean,
the hell
Jupiter's
is
in the
Jupiter?
sixth, and they
Sixth.
work. They work together.
They work. But because Jupiter is the ruler of her house of partnership, I would expect that if Fred Astaire does fall into the category of partner, then he's going to have, Jupiter is going to be a good description of his overall character and nature. Now, that may not be true. We'd have to go look at his chart.
And it's in Scorpio, so
Yeah,
it's a
it's
handful.
Yeah, Jupiter and Scorpio. I mean, that might be fascinating. It would be very interesting to go look, see if Jupiter and Scorpio looks like, is that what Fred Astaire was about?
Well, and
Alright.
sometimes polar opposites, can describe each other. That Taurian nature of his might have seemed scorpionic in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, he might have a lot of Scorpio, a very prominent Jupiter in his chart, and that sort of. Okay, well, I think we're done here,
Well, that was great, Paul.
and
Thank you.
I'm unfortunately, you're welcome. We're not going to be able to continue the classes because Christopher, due to personal reasons, is not going to be able to continue the class. So what we're doing is this is going to be the last class. It'll actually he does plan to continue it in mid-January, so there'll be quite a lapse of time. We'll have to wait and see how that goes. But for those people who have donated money for the class are welcome. You can get it. You can either apply it towards that, or we will, of course, refund anybody's money because we're not being able to complete the class, unfortunately. And I'm going to be out of town for the next 4 weeks, so or I would do it myself. I would continue the class, but yeah, I've got a grandbaby coming, so.
Well, thank you for coming
Thank you.
tonight.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it was fun.
Yeah.
I'm glad to do it. And thank everybody out there who tuned in on the internet for joining us. Sorry we can't continue, but
And you had a good group.
you had a good group, huh?
Yeah, they had a lot to say. They were helping you.
Good. Okay.